Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Ms. Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Mallow-Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Charles, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Terry Long, Ms. Smith, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Main, Mr. Davis, Mr. Witter, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Daly, Ms. Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Mr. Green, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hamilton, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, Ms. Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sibbles, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, and Mr. Wright.
Let me welcome the members of this Honourable House to a new session, one that has begun with the celebration of a new year, one with the celebration of new ministerial appointments and renewed hope for Jamaica. This is a very special year, our diamond anniversary. We celebrate 60 years of independence this year. Let us all redouble our efforts, those on the governing side, those on the opposition side. In fact, all Jamaicans pledging to continue this year to work diligently and creatively, to think generously and honestly, so that Jamaica may, under God, continue to increase in its beauty, fellowship, and prosperity. Welcome, everyone.
Madam Speaker, acting, I want to join you in welcoming our members back to this Honourable House for the final session before prorogation and the throne speech, which will be on the 10th of March. I beg your pardon, on the 10th of February, 2022. In welcoming all, I'd like to particularly congratulate a number of our members who have been elevated to the executive, and indeed, in the case of one member, has been given a new role in the executive. And Madam Speaker, may it please you that we congratulate our former Attorney General and now the Honourable Marlene Mallow-Fort, who has been elevated to be Minister of Legal Affairs and Constitutional Reform. We want to congratulate also the Honourable Floyd Green on his return to the executive at the Office of the Prime Minister as Minister without Portfolio. the Honourable Robert Morgan, who has been elevated to be Minister of Information in the Office of the Prime Minister also, and the elevation of someone, and I have great pleasure in announcing all my colleagues who have been elevated. But, Madam Speaker, I think you'll forgive me for this moment of indulgence, because this particular member, the Honourable Franklin Witter, Minister of State, and I want to particularly welcome him and congratulate him, has been a hard-working member of Parliament of long standing, and I think he has served this House very well as chairman of various committees. Madam Speaker, it is noteworthy for us to indicate that this House intends, under my leadership and the guidance of the Prime Minister, to ensure that we start Parliament at 2 o'clock every Tuesday when we are supposed to. And I want to urge members to be here so that we can have a quorum at exactly 2 o'clock for us to start the Parliament promptly at 2 o'clock, so that the business of the House can be made to go through without any concern about timelines, because we have enough and we are here, and make it efficient. And that's the whole point, efficiency, to use our time efficiently and well in carrying out the business of the people. Madam Speaker, today there will be 2 statements by ministers, and I invite you to ask the Most Honourable Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, to make the first statement, and then after, the Honourable Fayval Williams, the Minister of Education and Youth, to make her statement as well. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, in the absence of the Opposition House Leader, I would like to welcome everybody back to the Parliament. I'm grateful that we are starting on time, and I hope this trend continues throughout the parliamentary year, to congratulate the members on the government side who have been promoted, and to wish all of us the very best as we continue to advance the best interests of the country in 2022.
Thank you. Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me join you and the other speakers before me in wishing all members of Parliament and all the staff of Parliament of this Honourable House, as well as all Jamaicans, a new year filled with hope, happiness, health, peace, and prosperity. This has been a challenging year for all of us. But, Madam Speaker, I give thanks to the Almighty that I'm still alive, and we are all still alive to see the new year. There are many who did not cross over with us. Based on the latest report from this morning, Jamaica recorded 1,714 new cases of COVID-19 yesterday. Our cumulative cases of COVID-19 are now 105,172, and we have recorded 2,502 deaths. I express my heartfelt condolences to all those who have lost loved ones in this pandemic. The graph now being displayed shows the daily number of confirmed cases, which is the blue bars, as well as the 7-day average of new hospital admissions, the red line. Madam Speaker, you will see that our daily case count has now exceeded the previous peak in the third wave. Hospitalizations have also started to increase, but the rate of hospitalization as a proportion of persons infected is lower than in the third wave. The second graph that should now be displaying shows the test positivity rate by week. You can see from the white line that the weekly positivity rate has increased significantly and is now 58.6%, which is higher than our previous peak of 45.2% at the end of August 2021. The daily positivity, based on the results reported this morning, was 60.3%. Madam Speaker, the graph now being displayed shows that the number of COVID-related hospitalizations, which is the white line, has started to increase. It is still below our COVID bed capacity, which is the black line, but it is fast approaching the capacity of beds that we have. Madam Speaker, the next graph to be displayed on our screens now shows the number of COVID-19 patients in hospital requiring the use of high-flow nasal oxygen. So far, we are not seeing an increase in the hospitalized persons requiring high-flow nasal oxygen. It is still too early to arrive at a definitive conclusion, but this is nevertheless an encouraging sign. Madam Speaker, it is clear that we are now in the throes of our fourth wave of COVID-19 infections. While the preliminary indications are that the Omicron variant may result in a less severe illness than the Delta variant, especially in terms of need for high-flow nasal oxygen, we cannot be complacent. Persons who are unvaccinated remain at risk, particularly the elderly and those who are immunocompromised or have comorbidities. It is also important to note that we may also have, well, not may, we still have the Delta variant in circulation as well. The population must therefore continue to exercise a high degree of caution. Madam Speaker, the government had always anticipated this fourth wave and started to make preparations in terms of additional field hospitals and securing oxygen supply. But there are limits to how much capacity we can create. Even wealthy countries with much greater resources than Jamaica have had their health systems under stress. Ultimately, individuals and families have to take personal responsibility for their own protection. Madam Speaker, after nearly 2 years into the pandemic, we all know what to do to protect ourselves. Wear a mask. Madam Speaker, you will note that even though we permit it, that is for persons who are speaking in the House to remove their mask when they are speaking, I have kept my mask on while speaking. And I try to be very disciplined with it. I find that it has been most effective. And I encourage all Jamaicans, if there's one thing that you can do, it's in your hands to do it. It doesn't take anything off you. Wear your mask. And Madam Speaker, I give further encouragement to particularly wear the mask indoors. If you are in a public place which is indoor, office setting, you're going to pay a bill. In a classroom, for example, wear your mask. Wash your hands or sanitize if you're unable to wash your hands. Maintain the physical distance. Strengthen your immune system through proper diet and exercise. But above all else, get immunized. These protocols have been proven to work, and the vaccines have proven to work. As of 10 a.m. today, we had administered 1,241,816 doses of vaccines, 646,536 first doses, 506,951 second doses, 77,403 doses of the Johnson & Johnson single-dose vaccine, and 10,912 third doses or booster doses. We now have approximately 21% of the population fully vaccinated and approximately 26% of the population who have received at least one dose of the vaccine. Madam Speaker, I hear persons asking, vaccinated persons are also getting COVID, so why bother to take the vaccine? It is also being said that vaccines won't help with this wave of infections. Madam Speaker, it is true that with the Omicron variant, the number of breakthrough infections, that is, infections among fully vaccinated persons, has increased significantly. However, fully vaccinated persons are unlikely to end up in hospital or die as a result of COVID-19, unless, of course, they are severely immunocompromised. The facts are, and these facts are indisputable, and they have not been disputed. The facts are 98% of the persons in hospital are unvaccinated, and 98% of the deaths from COVID-19 are among the unvaccinated. The vaccines have been proven to be safe. Approximately 9.5 billion doses have been administered globally, and almost 60% of the population of the world has received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine with minimal, negligible adverse effects. I therefore urge all Jamaicans who have not yet done so to get immunized, and I encourage those who are fully vaccinated to take the booster when you are eligible to do so. Madam Speaker, we are now contending with the Omicron variant. Just 2 weeks ago, there was news that a new variant has been identified in France. All this only reinforces what we have been saying all along. The SARS-CoV-2 virus is here to stay. We therefore need to learn to live with COVID-19, at least over the medium term. COVID-19 will be with us. In November 2021, I had signaled to the country that we were beginning a cautious, gradual, and controlled process of getting the economy back into full productive capacity and to give all Jamaicans the opportunity to earn their livelihoods while protecting their health. Madam Speaker, that process continues. Were it not for the fourth wave, I would have liked to announce changes to the measures to further stimulate economic activity. However, as a result of the fourth wave, we have to hold the existing measures in place until we have more information on the number of positive cases that results in hospitalization and, in particular, require high-flow nasal oxygen. Madam Speaker, in light of these considerations, the Cabinet met yesterday and decided to extend the existing measures for an additional 2 weeks until January 27, 2022. This means that the curfew hours will remain at 10 p.m. nightly to 5 a.m. the following morning until 5 a.m. on January 28, 2022. All the other measures will also remain unchanged. Madam Speaker, as I close, let me say how pleased I am to see the resumption of face-to-face classes in most of our schools. Of all the negative impacts of the pandemic, this is the one I worry about the most. The learning lost to our children is incalculable, and we cannot afford to keep our children out of school any longer. We recognize that the return to face-to-face schooling is not without risks. The government is making every effort to make the school environment as safe as possible for our students and teachers. Minister Williams will give more details of the progress and plans for the reopening of school in her statement, which will follow. While the government will continue to do what it can, I want to make a special appeal to parents and guardians to closely monitor their children. If you see any indication that your child is not well, please keep them at home. This is the only way we will be able to keep the infection rate down in our schools. Madam Speaker, the government will continue to work on providing citizens with knowledge, that is through public education, and the means, that is the availability and accessibility of vaccines, to protect themselves. Whether or not they do so is ultimately a matter of personal choice. The government of Jamaica will be taking steps to ensure that we can secure and guarantee the continued operation and provision of government services. We have indicated long ago that we will put in place measures for testing and for requiring vaccination for public sector workers. Madam Speaker, the country must move on. We must move on with our lives. We must get our economy back on track. We cannot allow ourselves to be defeated by the pandemic. We cannot afford another lockdown. We cannot afford tighter curfew hours. We must learn to live with this virus. So, Madam Speaker, I urge all Jamaicans to make the responsible choice to keep yourselves and your families and your loved ones safe. Get vaccinated. Strengthen your immune system. Follow the protocols. And let us all learn to live with this virus. That is the only way we will defeat it. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I just want to start by wishing you and all of my colleagues in this Honourable House all the very best for the new year, for 2022, to wish them good health and to wish them a safe and prosperous year ahead. The Prime Minister has affirmed that the existing measures for addressing the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, the existing measures under the Disaster Risk Management Act will be extended for, I think he said, another 2 weeks, Prime Minister, 2 weeks. And for my part, I consider that to be necessary at this time. Yes, we would all like to reach the point where we can start to return to the modes of living that we were accustomed to, what seems like an awfully long time ago now. But now is not the time for being carefree about this, because we are in the midst of a wave of infection occasioned and caused by what appears to be an extremely contagious and infectious variant of this virus. Fortunately, it does appear that the Omicron variant is not as dangerous to persons who contract it as some of the other variants that have come before it, in particular Delta. But nevertheless, it has resulted in around 300 people now being in hospital with COVID-19. And the number has been rising very sharply in a short space of time. So this is not something we can trivialize. This is not something that we can take lightly. I would like to use this opportunity to encourage everybody to follow the guidelines of social distancing, avoid unnecessary gatherings of people, don't speak up in anybody's face or have anybody speak up in your face, keep a reasonable distance away. This is a virus that is transmitted through the air from one person to the next, generally speaking. There are other ways of transmission, but that's the primary way. So by being sensible of how we live, we can try to minimize the risk. Wear your masks in public gatherings in particular, or in any other place where you feel you might be vulnerable to either receiving droplets from somebody else or indeed transmitting droplets to them. And continue with the hand washing at reasonable intervals, especially when you've been touching surfaces or touching other people's hands and so on, which you should really try and avoid. So for the next 2 weeks, it is really going to be up to everybody to act as responsibly as possible so that we can get past this particular flare-up of infections as quickly as possible and with as low level of hospitalizations and ultimately deaths as we can. I want to publicly thank again all the healthcare workers in the public sector in particular, all the doctors, all the nurses, the porters, the ancillary workers of every type who are there in the front lines taking care of people who are ill. I want to encourage everybody to continue to care for each other in a responsible way and try to minimize their exposure. In relation to back to school, we are anxious to see children back in face-to-face classes. We have been saying so for some time. There is no doubt that the last 2 years has been a disaster for the education of many children. Hundreds of thousands of children have had virtually no effective education for one reason or another, to do with their access to the internet, access to devices, and so on. So face-to-face classes and the resumption of it is the single most important achievement that we must get to happen in our country. Now, of course, we don't have vaccines for children under 12 in Jamaica. And even for children who are between 12 and 18, the percentage of them who have been fully vaccinated is, generally speaking, nationally lower than those targeted. And in fact, very few schools have actually reached the 65% threshold that had been set by the government. So, that being the case, we have to try and ensure that people are vigilant and people have access to testing. And the access to testing is particularly important at this time when we're encouraging and facilitating face-to-face learning. Really, we want a system of free testing being available to children and to parents of children who are in school, so that if they have any concern or fear that their child may have been exposed to the virus and may be contracting the virus, that they can have that established without significant expense on their part, and can take steps to try and minimize the risks associated with infection, because there are things that one can do if one contracts a virus to try to manage the process so as to avoid getting very ill. There's no panacea that I'm aware of, but certainly things that build up your immunity, taking the right combination of supplements or vitamins and eating the right food are things that can strengthen the body's immune system and reduce the chances of the infection becoming very serious. And so it is important to know whether or not you or your child has been infected by the virus. And my concern is for children going back to school, and there's not been a kind of school-wide access to free testing for children. And this is something I would ask that the government look at. Tests are available now at relatively low cost. I know some have been distributed and so on, but speaking for myself and our spokesperson for health, I'm sure can elaborate on this further, but I'm concerned that the access to testing is not as comprehensive as is desirable, given that we are trying to resume face-to-face classes, and we are in the middle of a very serious spike. So, Prime Minister, the primary gist of your presentation was the extension of the protocols for 2 more weeks. I think the public will understand the need for that. I think it's manifest that given what's happening in our hospitals, we have to be cautious. And I would just encourage, the orders under the DMRA Act are one thing, but having the population accept the need to be particularly cautious at this time is tremendously important. And if we can ramp up the messaging in the public media for the next few days and weeks, just to ensure that everybody is focused on the need to protect themselves and others by following the basic guidelines, I would encourage the government to do that. I know that I will be told that that's been happening all along, but at this time I think it's particularly important that we go extremely hard in pressing for this information to be pushed out through media channels and other channels, both traditional and social media, so that anybody who's in any kind of doubt or who just doesn't tend to listen to media much, there's a better chance that they will hear the message and adjust their behavior accordingly. So thank you, Prime Minister. And as I said before, I wish you and your family, and indeed all of our colleagues in here, a very Happy New Year and all the best for 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition has basically said it, but there's just a little question I'd like to ask. We have always had this back and forth, particularly in the Parliament, about testing. The reality, however, is that this new dispensation we have found ourselves with Omicron, and with its increased transmissibility, the reality is that to help to curb the spread of it, there has to be increased testing. I know that you have said that in the past that in terms of public health planning, the tests that are being done gives the government or the ministry a idea as to what is happening. But that was for the other variants. Now we have Omicron, which is about 3 to 4 times more transmissible than the Delta, which was 3 to 4 times the original strain. And we are seeing exponential rise. We have had the highest numbers in this country in terms of daily positive numbers, as well as the highest positive rate we have ever had since the pandemic of around 60 yesterday. So we need to revisit the whole aspect of testing. I'm happy that the home testing kits are here and that they have been deployed in the schools. You remember that 26th of October discussion in the Parliament last year. But I think in terms of also in terms of the health facilities, and Minister Tufton and I have had a little exchange about the cap on testing, and he has said that it has not happened, but I think he needs to go back and have a look at it. But be that as it may, as many persons who would require it now ought to get it, simply because we want to contain it within whatever quarters it is found, whatever household it is found, so that in the initial stage of the pandemic, we had random testing across the country. People who wanted testing, not necessarily because they had symptoms, but who wanted testing. I think we should, at this stage, reintroduce or go back to that particular, so that people can have an idea. You see, Prime Minister, there are many persons out there who have it and are asymptomatic. But guess what? They can still spread it. So if we have a wider testing base, if we have the capacity, and we do in this country, to test more persons, then it should be open to all who want it, so that the containment, the quarantine, the isolation measures can be put into place quickly to prevent further spread to others. A suggestion, it is something that I'm going to ask you, to ask your technocrats in the ministry to look at, because it is cause for concern, the numbers we are seeing. And even though the numbers in hospital have not reached what they were in the third wave, the reality is that we run the risk of getting there just by the sheer numbers who are getting positive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one question, Prime Minister. It has to do with the figures you give from time to time about the number of persons who are vaccinated. I am aware that there are many Jamaicans who, especially in those early days when vaccines weren't prevalent, they go overseas and they are vaccinated. Many, and I know the ease in which you can get vaccinated over there. I'm just wondering if is there a mechanism for the government to track and trace through the Jam COVID mechanism to be able to give a proper count of the Jamaicans, of the number of persons who are vaccinated. I don't think that has been tracked at all. And my own view is that the numbers might be a bit higher based on the number of Jamaicans who I have met who claim that they did not get vaccinated here. They went overseas to do that, so probably you could respond to that.
Thank you, members, and let me start with the leader of the opposition's statements. Firstly, let me wish for you and your family happy, peaceful, and prosperous, or more prosperous, rather. More prosperous New Year. Madam Speaker, I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his statements reinforcing the need for every Jamaican to follow the established protocols. At this time, Madam Speaker, there is a sentiment being expressed, and indeed maybe even an expectation that the government should revert to the crude shielding measures, lockdowns, tighter curfews, and so forth. My understanding of the response from the opposition is that they too also do not see that this is a path that could be considered reasonable in response to the fourth wave. So, Madam Speaker, I think it is important that as a Parliament unified in response to COVID, it is understood that we must move on with our lives, and the citizen must take personal responsibility for following the protocols. The spokesperson on health again raises the issue of testing. Madam Speaker, we test for various reasons. The Ministry of Health tests for confirmation. That is to establish that a person is infected with the virus of interest. That testing, by virtue of how it is done, it is not necessarily random, but the persons who end up in the sample effectively self-select because they end up either going to the hospital for testing, or they have to travel, or they were exposed. And that sample approximates what would be happening in the population, usually very well. You can also test for prevalence, meaning that you would want to see exactly how wide and far the virus is in the population. So you would probably want to structure your population. You'd want to test by age group, test by geographical location, and so forth. And then that would give you a good dispersion of the spread of the virus in various stratified categories. And then, Madam Speaker, you want to test, not from the government perspective, but let us say an employer wants to understand what is the potential impact of infection on his staff. So you want to test for screening purposes. Now, Madam Speaker, the government will continue to test for confirmatory purposes. We agree that there needs to be testing for prevalence. And the Ministry of Health has already said that they are looking to see how they can do that. What we need to give more effort to, and the Ministry of Health has ramped up its capacity there, is to facilitate testing for screening purposes. And you would have seen, member, that we have now increased the number of testing agents and testing sites that are privately operated, and we have now approved the home self-test kits. So there is no capacity for screening. The challenge is, member, and I'm agreeing with you that we need to do more testing, is that everybody wants to test. Everybody wants to test, and we just simply don't have enough tests being, well, maybe enough tests are being produced, but based upon the logistics and the ability to acquire, we may not be first in line all the time to get all the tests that we need. We have managed to bring in some tests, and we have given those tests out in the population. We have given some to the private sector, we have given a large number to schools, but those, Madam Speaker and members, certainly will not be enough, because testing for screening will now be continuous. So yes, we are agreeing that the government needs to start the process and may need to even seed it, but I don't think we could expect that the government would continuously be able to provide tests for screening purposes. So clearly, the private sector would have to pick up their cost for testing for their employees and so forth. Government will make some testing available to its employees. Maybe we'll do it for 2 or 3 months as our budget can afford. And certainly we will make some testing available for schools for a period of time. But ultimately the cost of testing would have to be borne by the consumers. Government will try to give some subsidy, but we couldn't stand here and say we could afford a budget to constantly be underwriting the cost of testing for screening. The government will continue, however, the testing for confirmation, and we will obviously stand the cost for that, as we have always been doing. And we will conduct tests for prevalence, and obviously we will stand the cost of that. So I just thought I would explain that process, member. I'm not speaking definitively, member from East Kingston and Port Royal, and I will probably not answer you in a direct way, simply to say that I agree with you that we need to have a mechanism to incorporate those Jamaicans who have tested abroad in our database, who have vaccinated abroad in our database. I am not certain whether or not the existing software app platform would be able to accommodate that, but I'm certain it is something that could easily be changed to accommodate verified overseas vaccination. But yes, I think they should be incorporated in our local database so that we have a better understanding of the figures.
Minister Williams.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me say my best wishes to all Jamaicans as we begin this new year. Madam Speaker, nearly all our schools returned from Christmas break with varying numbers of students in the face-to-face environment. Even as the COVID-19 virus is causing disruptions to learning, our students and our teachers are utilizing all the modalities, online, audiovisual, learning kits, and face-to-face to ensure that the mental health of our children get attention and the academic progress of our students continue. To date, there are a total of 954 of our primary and high schools that have been approved as COVID-19 compliant by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, meaning there has been a physical reinspection of our schools for COVID and non-COVID issues.
Minister,
a COVID-compliant school has wash stations or sinks.
Minister Williams, hold a moment, please. Somehow the level of latent noise across the house is making it very difficult to hear anything you're saying. So, House, could you be a lot more quiet? Thank you very much. Go ahead, Minister Williams.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To date, there are a total of 954 of our primary and high schools that have been approved as COVID-19 compliant by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, meaning there has been a physical reinspection of our schools for COVID as well as non-COVID issues. A COVID-compliant school has wash stations or sinks where the children have easy access to wash their hands, distance markers to make the students aware of how far apart to stand or sit from each other, an isolation room with its own bathroom facilities in the event a child shows up with runny nose, coughing, or with a fever. That child can be isolated until medical help arrives. In this environment of the new Omicron virus, our priority is to keep our children as safe as we can while they are in the school environment. Our manual for the reopening of educational institutions, Emergencies in Education Manual, is on its third version. It was published at the start of the pandemic and distributed electronically to all our principals and has been kept updated. It speaks to the general guidelines for the full reopening of schools. It looks at sanitization and hygiene practices, management of the sick, protocol for treating with individuals who are suspected of being infected, wearing of mask or face covering, protocols for entry to the school compound, general guidelines to maintain social or physical distancing, scheduling, lunch, transportation. There's a section on special education for special education schools and programs that speaks to the physical environment, educational programming, psychosocial support, diagnostic assessment and therapeutic services, shadow caregivers, and teachers' aid. There's also a section dealing with the National School Learning and Intervention Plan, responsibilities of school administrative staff, responsibilities of parents. So, Madam Speaker, we have been taking care to ensure that we disseminate information to our principals or teachers to help them to manage during this COVID pandemic. At our schools, there's a requirement for hand sanitization and temperature checks at the school gate. Students must wear masks and observe the physical distancing. The pictures which are being shown of our students as they come back into the face-to-face environment at various schools give a sense of what it is like inside the classrooms for those students and teachers who are back in the face-to-face teaching and learning environment. And so you will see the pictures, the distancing, how children come back into school, and you will note that not all students are back yet in the face-to-face environment. A recent World Bank study for Jamaica showed that the fiscal impact over and above what we are currently spending to support the health and safety requirements for opening our schools is going to be on the order of 2.4 to 3.9 billion annually for 1 to 2 years. This includes the cost of re-enrollment, campaigns, and outreach activities, providing targeted support for the most at-risk students, mitigating and preventing dropout, and facilitating remedial education to minimize learning loss. The World Bank also concluded that the long-term cost of inaction is on the order of 828 billion Jamaican dollars, or approximately 40% of Jamaica's GDP. Our efforts to reopen our schools for face-to-face have to be seen against this background of the significant learning
Minister
loss.
Williams, hold a moment. House, if you're not interested in what the minister has to say, I certainly am, and I'd like to hear her speak. It is absolutely not the best tone for us to start this session with this level of noise. Minister Williams.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our efforts to reopen our school for face-to-face have to be seen against the significant learning loss our children have been experiencing since March 2020, when they were required to be at home. Since then, they've only been able to come back to the physical classrooms for very short periods, not enough to make a significant impact on the learning loss. As a result, we must do the best we can to keep our children safe as they travel from home to school, as they're in the classrooms, and as they return home. We seek the help of all Jamaicans, but in particular the parents and guardians, to help to keep our children safe. We're pleading with parents who have children in our primary schools for whom there is no vaccine at this time in Jamaica for them. Please seek to get yourselves vaccinated so that you can provide protection for for yourself and for your children. To the parents of high school students, we ask that you have a conversation with your children. Encourage them to take the vaccines. And I give the same encouragement to all our principals, our teachers, our staff, and all who work in the school environment and have to interact with our children. Help us to protect them so that they have the opportunity to recover the learning they have lost. The future cost is too great. Our schools will continue to operate using a blended approach where all students cannot be facilitated all at once in the face-to-face setting. These approaches include online learning, audiovisual platforms, and the learning kits or packages with workbooks and worksheets depending on the grade. The data gathered for the period January 3 to 7, which was the first week of school, showed that 60% of students in the public school system reported to school via one or more of the learning modalities available. They were involved in orientation activities, psychosocial and empowerment sessions, assessment, and other learning activities on a rotational basis. The data we have collected as of today suggests that roughly 40% of students did not access any of the learning modalities available for the first week of school. We are expecting to see this number decline significantly as more of our students return to the face-to-face in the weeks ahead. But we're not leaving it up to chance. Madam Speaker, as a national call to action to identify, locate, and re-engage our students, we will be rolling out our yard-to-yard Find the Child initiative. This initiative will operate for 3 months, January to March 2022. Through this initiative, 580 youth workers under the HOPE program and 108 social workers will be engaged to complement the school-based teams of 478 public schools island-wide to go yard to yard to help to find our students and to re-engage them with their schools so that they can continue their learning. Also, Madam Speaker, a Family Connect app is being developed as a tool to support the data collection and reporting process to inform evidence-based interventions. All public schools are now engaged in the re-verification process of their unaccounted students. The Ministry is currently in the process of exporting data of over 15,000 unaccounted students submitted by 294 schools into this app, and we will begin to work with these families immediately. We will be taking an interministerial approach to respond to the needs of these targeted families. As the pandemic continues, we must continue to increase access to learning opportunities. We must continue to ensure, and we will continue to ensure, all our students have devices to help in the learning recovery. I'm pleased to note, Madam Speaker, that the Ministry, in collaboration with eLearning Jamaica, will be procuring a total of 42,311 devices for lower primary and secondary students, and eLearning Jamaica Limited has already procured 11,500 tablets and is presently preparing to start the distribution to lower secondary school students in the rural schools across the island. This will help to significantly reduce, as we know, the digital divide. We've had a significant effort on that all during the pandemic. And to date, we have distributed approximately 130,000 tablets and laptops to our teachers and students with a special focus on students on path. Again, we thank all those who've come on board to make that possible. As a government, we will continue with the many initiatives started last year to get to our goal of a device in the hands of every student in Jamaica to help the learning process. Madam Speaker, the Ministry will continue to provide audiovisual lessons via the Public Broadcasting Corporation of Jamaica, PBCJ, and the Ministry's 2 new TV channels through the e-homeschool network. One channel focuses on offering live and recorded lessons for primary and the others focused on secondary school students. We continue to publish the timetable so students can know what is coming on when. We've coupled this with the ability for the students to ask questions and have some interaction with the teachers who are offering live lessons on these 2 TV channels. The Ministry's YouTube channel will continue to carry content for all levels. All our children should be able to have access to the learning that is being delivered on at least one of the various platforms. Our yard-by-yard visits by our intervention officers will ensure that no child falls through the system. Madam Speaker, we are also continuing our work on internet connection for schools. We continue to respond to the crisis brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we've been working assiduously with the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation to develop an affordable and robust approach to the provisioning of adequate internet connectivity to all public schools. This will ensure equity and inclusion with a special focus on students in remote areas with limited access to the internet. Madam Speaker, we're not just speaking about it. We have started the onboarding of 362 schools that are located in close proximity to the government's fiber infrastructure. Of that, connectivity work has started in 43 schools. 30 schools have been fully connected. And for the remaining 661 schools that are not in close proximity to the government's fiber infrastructure, we are far advanced with a national procurement of internet supply for our schools. Additionally, we are completing the survey of the system and are advanced in the plan to upgrade the networking capability of our schools so that there is Wi-Fi access in all classrooms to enable teachers to manage a blended environment in which some students will be in the remote or virtual environment while others are in the physical classroom on a rotational basis. Madam Speaker, even as we work to eliminate the digital divide in terms of access to devices, improved connectivity, affordable data plans, rich content, to engage the absorptive capacity of our students, this school year we're tackling the various other inequities in our education sector, the most serious being knowledge inequity. That is the gap between those students who are high-performing or high-achieving and those who are not. The Specialist Teacher Model Initiative, Phases 1A and 1B, is being implemented with 288 in Phase 1A and 138 teachers in Phase 1B, respectively. Phase 2 will be implemented in September 2022 with 186 teachers, while Phase 3 will be implemented in 2023 with 157 teachers. The subject areas will be mathematics and science, language arts and social studies, language arts and Spanish, music, drama and visual arts, civics, STEM resource and technology. Madam Speaker, in this Parliament, I indicated that we're transitioning away from the days of one teacher in a primary school classroom teaching all subjects, and we have taken steps to begin the implementation of the Specialist Teacher Model, which is one of our flagship initiatives this school year, and we expect it to significantly increase the level in all the mentioned subject areas, thus reducing the knowledge inequity in the education sector.
House Leader, the Minister's time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the member's time be extended sufficiently to allow her to finish the statement. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Oh, sorry.
Question is that the member's time be extended to facilitate completion of her presentation. Those in favor? Aye. Those against, the ayes have it. Minister Williams.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as of February 1, 2022, we will commence our extra lesson or homework program to provide additional learning support and individual learning interventions to students based on their diagnostic and internal assessment reports. We've trained our teachers in differentiated learning, and we have deployed our technical officers, curriculum specialists, literacy and language coaches or specialists, math coaches, among others, to provide support to the learning programs in our school. Our schools were provided with nutritional grants to ensure our students on path are provided with meals, and have intensified our psychosocial support program to ensure the psychological readiness of our staff and students for learning as they learn to cope with the emotional demands of the pandemic. Madam Speaker, recently we received 5,000 COVID-19 test kits from the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and these are being distributed to our schools. This is an additional tool that we will use in the school system to help us in the fight against COVID-19. Madam Speaker, this school year will have its fair share of new challenges, but we are committed and determined, Madam Speaker, to providing the best educational opportunities for all our children. As I close, Madam Speaker, let me take this opportunity to publicly thank Minister Robert Nesta Morgan for the energy he brought to the work that he did at the Ministry of Education, Youth, and, no, I can't say and anymore, right? Right. His primary focus, as you know, was the Youth Division and Information, and I know that he will continue to do a fantastic job in his new role. Thank you, Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Bill, oh, my apologies.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Could I just ask for the podium, just because the presentation made by the minister is just in separate pages, and it's a little easier to speak from my notes.
Yeah, hold a moment, please. She would like to use a podium. So just holding. Member Brown-Burke would like to borrow a podium, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Permit me, as I begin, Madam Speaker, to also wish a happy new year and a very prosperous one to members in the House, and in particular to members of the educational fraternity, our teachers, principals, parents, and the students. Madam Speaker, I have had an opportunity to just peruse and listen, as well as listen to the presentation made by the minister. I'm indeed pleased that we have had this before us to really look at where we are in terms of education. I certainly am pleased that where we are today, there is a general understanding that doing nothing or keeping our children out of school is not the answer. And that indeed the loss that we suffered from having them out of school from March 2020 until we first started to bring them back, that was doing irreparable harm, and that the cost to recover would be as much as the data is now showing. I want to say at the outset that, notwithstanding the fact that we are only at 34%, as the minister has indicated, in terms of vaccination amongst the student population, that I do support the idea of bringing our students out face to face. And when we say face-to-face in today's world, we know that we are in fact referring to a blended approach, because there's almost nowhere in the world that we go back to only face-to-face, but rather we are in the world where some kind of hybrid or blended system is what is the order of the day. Madam Speaker, I looked at the information in terms of the 954 primary and high schools that have been approved by the ministry to go back to face-to-face. And I noted, therefore, that there would be about 29 where there are issues. It would be important, Madam, to you, Madam Minister, if we had an idea as to what are some of the issues. If not specific issues, then certainly categories of issues, so we could understand what is facing our students and our teachers at this time. In terms of just what is required, there is no doubt that even once we talk about a face-to-face environment, that it is going to be important to make sure that not just the education takes place, but that our children and our teachers and students and parents are all safe. So it's about how we balance education and safety, and that has been the concern facilitating us. When I look at what you're saying, Minister, about the cost each year, which you are estimating, following the World Bank study for Jamaica, that would be between 2.4 and 3.9 billion for the next year or two. I note that the areas that you're looking for targeted support is, of course, our students who are most at risk, preventing and mitigating dropout, and facilitating remedial education to minimize learning loss. And we are all aware, Minister, that where we are in terms of the inequities and certainly the remedial education that is required, it is a mammoth task. It is a mammoth task because where we are today, it is the accumulation of years of inequity and years, even though we have made progress, of not moving fast enough. And the question I would want to ask Minister, and I haven't fully seen that as I've read and listened to you, it would seem to me that given where we are and how we have gotten here across administrations, that it requires almost a revolutionary approach to how we deal with education and how we address the inequities and the two Jamaicans that we have that you referred to in terms of the gap in knowledge equity and how we reverse that. And I just feel that it is not going to be an easy task, otherwise it would have been done already if it were that easy. So there are going to be some serious challenges. And I believe that the opportunity is now, Minister, to ensure that as a country, we build a national understanding and partnership about all the aspects of what needs to happen so that we can, in fact, get there. In terms of the conversation that you're encouraging that parents have, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, by the way, because I believe that one of the things we have to do now is to, I know we have been doing it, schools have been doing it over the years, but I believe that greater focus has to be paid on how we encourage the engagement of parents. Schools will tell you that parents are normally very much engaged in the first year of school and in the final year of school. So first form, all parents come out, and you probably never see them until it's time to graduate. And it's the same thing with primary schools. They're there for grade 1, and you never see them until graduation in grade 6. I believe now is the time for us to really put a lot more into engaging our parents into becoming real partners in education. It is important because when we talk about the psychosocial support, Minister, that is required, it is not just for the students and for the teachers, but it is also the psychosocial support for our parents so that they too can understand what is happening with their children, how that manifests itself at school, and what the teachers have to deal with. And so I haven't seen in there, I've seen the encouragement, which is a good start, but I have not seen specifically how the program in school will be rolled out to get that. And I'm sure it is going to mean additional resources to schools to be able to do some of that.
Member, your time for speaking has expired. House Leader.
If you would give me...
I'm just going through the motions, not to worry.
Madam Speaker, I will ask for the extension of time to facilitate the member's conclusion of her presentation. But I'd just like to urge that members appreciate that a response to a statement by a minister does not provide the opportunity for an extended statement to be made in response, but rather an annotated statement that hits at the key points and makes the member respond efficiently and well. So, Madam Speaker, I request that the member's time be extended to allow her to finish her statement.
House Leader, the extension was given, though not properly extended, because I was waiting for a juncture to be able to step in and ask the House for permission. So, House, the question is that the member's time be extended to allow or to facilitate her completing her response to statement by Minister. Those in favor? I'm not hearing you. Those opposed, the ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, colleagues, for your gracious permission, which I assure you will not be abused. So let me see how quickly I can do it. Minister, I'm still concerned that when I look at the re-verification process that you speak about in terms of the students that are unaccounted for, it only addresses 15,000 students. That would be about 5%. Since we know that we did not have 95% of our students engaged, I would love to hear a little bit more about what is happening to the gap, those that are not accounted for here. Since those are the students that are not engaged and not accounted for would be far in excess of the 15,000. So I'm very concerned about that. Minister, I saw all of what you did in terms of the adjustment in curriculum and what is needed, the yard by yard and the master teachers and so on. A comment I keep getting from our principals and teachers, though, Minister, is that the kind of support they are really looking for from the Ministry of Education is a policy support, as well as using the other agencies in terms of the more detail. But it seems to me that there's a thinking that the ministry is outlining some detailed responses and not accounting for the fact that one size does not fit all. So I'm concerned about that. I'm going to ask you to look at that and to see how we do it. You know, it is always important to allow the curriculum adjustment following the policy position that is laid out to be taken at the local level by our school leaders and not to have the ministry into it as much as it seems at the time. The last point I probably would want to make, Minister, well, two. One is, will there be a targeted public education for our schools, since it might be easier, one, to deal with some of the misinformation and disinformation that we know is sparking some of the hesitancy, and give us an opportunity to understand all of the issues that have led to the hesitancy so that we can improve where we are with the vaccination levels. So that is one. And then, secondly, if we could also, Minister, just ensure that as we support our teachers and as we make sure that they know that the work that they're doing is valued and that we see value in it, that we show that in all different kinds of ways. And I say that, Minister, because I'm still extremely concerned that up until the end of last week, there were still some teachers who taught in the summer who have still not been paid. I am ending here, but I know that you'd want me to ask this question because there are some teachers in your constituency with the same concern. So I'm concerned about, Minister, and on that point I do end. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister Williams.
Thank you, Member, for the questions and recommendations. Your first one had to do with the 29 schools that are not yet approved by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. You asked what kind, what are some of the issues with these schools. The issues, as you would expect, termites, cafeteria issues, roof issues. So you might ask, termites, you get the person to go and spray, but you would not believe the damage that can happen when schools are left closed up. There's one particular school that was recently built in the last 3 or so years. And when they showed me pictures of the damage to the school, to the doors, to other parts of the school, I could not believe it. So that school we're working on it, and so we're working on the other 29 to repair whatever the issues are, so they too can be in the face-to-face environment. And I agree with you that in terms of education and where we are currently, that we do need a revolutionary approach, and that it is not going to be an easy task. It's going to require a national coming together of parents, guardians, everyone in Jamaica, with concern for the education system to come together. But I do know that the education transformation study that was commissioned by the Prime Minister, he will soon speak to the nation about that in terms of what those recommendations are, and that will begin that kind of conversation about our school system. You asked about the vaccination program in our schools. What are we doing? What are some of the things that we're doing to deal with the hesitancy? And so, of course, in our high schools, as you know, we do have high school nurses that interact with our students additionally, or principals. They still are doing vaccination events in the school, and it's easier, I think, when our students are there, for them to interact with fellow students and hear that, oh yeah, I got it and I'm okay, and we will see that. In fact, if you look at the data at the end of December, we were at about 31%. And during the first week of school, that had moved up a couple of percentage points. So we are seeing the take-up as more students come to school. In terms of the re-verification exercise, it's literally asking all our schools, class by class by class, to look at the students who are back in the face-to-face environment or online, who they're in touch with, and to see who is missing. And to literally have a name, a phone number, a parent associated with that child, so then we can begin the yard-to-yard intervention that we need to begin. This is just the beginning. This 15,000 is just the beginning number, but as we go along, I know that we will get more names. In terms of allowing more autonomy in our schools, I think that's what you were suggesting by this one size does not fit all. I believe we do allow as much as is possible in our schools. Could there be more? I'm sure we could always have that conversation to see specifically what are the areas that we could do that in. And your last question about some teachers who would have taught summer school and still not paid. Unfortunately, we do have a few teachers. I know that there was a significant effort to ensure that all the papers were processed and that the majority of our teachers, I think, there's still some, as you say, who are not, but I know that every time it comes to our attention and we get the documentation, we take quick action on that. As you're aware, the education system has a high percentage of manualness about it. Paper, forms to be filled out and transported from wherever they are, in the far end reaches of Jamaica to the central office, because we still require original documents, original signature, and so forth. As we improve on the operational efficiencies, as we bring more computerization, more digitization into the education system, some of these decades-old issues will be addressed. Obviously, for the short term, in terms of those particular teachers, we just, still have to take their physical form and process it and get them their pay. But it's not a lot, because I've seen the flow, and I know that action was taken to deal with the ones that have come in. Thank you.
Member Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too want to wish everyone in the House, members, staff alike, all the best for the new year. Minister, I refer to your statement on page 9, and I'll preface my question by indicating that I too welcome the return of face-to-face. Visited the schools in my constituency. Both the teachers and the students are welcoming of being face-to-face again. However, the challenge, like many others, is the question of connectivity. I see here on page 9 of your statement, Madam Minister, you mentioned 362 schools, connectivity work has started. In 43 schools, 30 schools have been fully connected. Could you provide a list of those schools so that at least for those in our respective constituencies, we can know exactly where they are, when is the likelihood of getting where they need to go, etc. And secondly, Madam Minister, in the case of my constituency, they have both service providers, but the service is inadequate, either in terms of its capacity or whatever it is, but it is not being able to be accessed sufficiently by the schools. And as you know, with them being back out for the blended approach, they need to be fully on board. My question in that regard, Minister, is some of the schools indicate to me that cost is a factor for them in terms of the quality of package from the service provider. In that regard, my question is, what specific support can be provided for those schools where the network providers in those areas can provide, but the cost might be prohibitive for the schools to access the Wi-Fi and provide adequate Wi-Fi provision? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. If you will allow me to come back to the Parliament, just specifically speak about the efforts in terms of connectivity, but just to say that currently, when we speak about those 30 schools or so, it's the large high schools that we've started with. Those tend to be in urban areas close to the government's infrastructure. Those are the ones that we are onboarding, but we're also engaged in a procurement process for service from the providers. So whereas in the past, or individual schools would enter into a contract with the service provider. We're doing it different, where we at the Central Ministry are procuring that service for schools so that the cost of that will be borne at the center, right, and it will be monitored from a central perspective, so that the schools don't have to deal with not just the cost, but the unequal. All right, but we will come back to just lay out and by school to let MPs know where their schools are in the process. In the timeline, I'd say by not the next one, but the next Parliament. All right.
Bills brought from the Senate. My apologies, I missed announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Jamaica second supplementary estimates for the financial year ending March 2022. Second supplementary estimate, Jamaica Public Bodies Estimate of Revenue and Expenditure for the financial year ending March 31, 2022. The proceeds of CRIDE, designated non-financial institution, trust, and corporate services providers order, and the resolution 2022. Ministry paper number 1 of 2022 entitled Annual Report of the Office of the Utilities Regulations for the financial year 2020-2021. Ministry paper number 2 of 2022 entitled Annual Report of the Administrator General's Department for the financial year 2019-2020 and its annual report. Ministry paper number 3 of 2022 entitled Annual Report of the Financial Service Commission for the financial year ended March 31, 2021 and its annual report. Annual report of the National Water Commission for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual report of the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office for the period 2011 to 2012 and 2012 to 2013. Annual report of the Auditor General's Department for the financial year 2020-2021. Report of the Auditor General's Department on the results of examination of the accounts of the island for the year ended March 31, 2021. Annual report on audited financial statement for the Electoral Commission of Jamaica for the financial year 2020-2021. Certified appropriation accounts for head 16,000 Office of the Cabinet for the year 2019-2020. Head 17,000 Ministry of Tourism for the year 2017-2018. Head 46,000A and 46,000B for Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport for the year 2018-2019. 0200 Houses of Parliament for the year 2013, 2014 and 2014-2015. Head 202,000 Houses of Parliament for the year 2015-2016 and for the year 2016-2017. I also ask that Ministry paper number 2 of 2020, Ministry paper number 102 of 2021 and its resolution entitled Government Guarantee of a Loan in the amount of $8,001,741,050 to the National Water Commission from the Bank of Nova Scotia Jamaica Limited for the Jamaica Water Supply Improvement Project be withdrawn.
Bills brought from the Senate. House. The request is being made of the House to withdraw the last item that was read, withdrawal of Ministry Paper 102-2021. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Bills brought by the Senate. Bills brought from the Senate.
The following is a message from the President of the Senate. To the Honourable House of Representatives, I have the honour to advise the Honourable House of Representatives that on the 17th day of December 2021, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corrections Act was passed in the Senate without amendment. Signed, Thomas Tavares Finson, OJCD, QC, JP, President of the Senate.
Thank you. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Madam Speaker.
House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next sitting of the House, I will move, be it resolved, with reference to the resolution approved by this Honourable House on the 29th day of September 2020, appointing a Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, that the committee be allowed to hold virtual meetings, whether wholly virtual or partly virtual and partly physical, utilizing available information and communication technologies in the manner more specifically outlined below. Preserving the rights, powers, and privileges, including voting rights, normally accorded to a member of a committee, the committee is empowered to 1. Convene and hold meetings in virtual space created using information and communication technologies which shall be considered committee meetings for the purpose of the mandate of the committee. 2. To allow access and participation from remote locations, as are enabled by means of information and virtual technologies by members and other persons authorized by the committee. 3. Include members assessing and participating from remote locations as a part of its quorum. And 4. To receive, consider, deliberate on, and respond to feedback and submissions in formats, modes, and media, and via platforms, modes, and medias enabled by means of information and communication technologies from any person. And 5thly, considering any and all information generated, communicated, and received via formats, platforms, modes, or media as enabled by means of information and communication technologies as forming a part of the record of these committee meetings. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motions.
Thanks, House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. Be it resolved that the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, which were laid on the table of the House on the 11th day of January 2022, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the proceeds of crime, designated non-financial institutions, trust and corporate services providers, Resolution 2022. Whereas paragraph 1, 2 of the 4th schedule to the Proceeds of Crime Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the designated non-financial institution means a person who is A, not primarily engaged in carrying out financial business, and B, designated as a non-financial institution for the purposes of the Act by the Minister by order subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas on the 10th day of January 2022, the Minister made the proceeds of crime designated non-financial institutions, trusts and corporate services providers, Order 2022. And whereas it is desirable that the proceeds of crime designated non-financial institutions, trusts and corporate services providers, Order 2022 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the proceeds of crime designated non-financial institutions, trust and corporate services providers, Resolution 2022. 2. The proceeds of crime designated non-financial institution, trust and corporate service providers, Order 2022, as is affirmed.
Member Jackson.
Sorry, Madam Speaker, I further beg. Sorry, my apologies.
No, go ahead. Horace.
I further beg to give note that at the later stage I will move for the suspension of the standing orders, enable me to take the motion.
Thanks, Minister. Member Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, whereas the current COVID-19 pandemic has imposed the necessity to take steps to reduce the level of close contact between individuals to stem the level and rate of COVID-19 virus infection across the country. And whereas current work from home practices and experiences have demonstrated significant economic and social advantages in greater productivity, reduced traffic congestion, and other benefits. And whereas employees are being or will be required to work from their homes because of government or private employer policy or voluntarily, and as a result, employees' homes have consequently become their place of work. And whereas both public and private places of employment are required to provide liability insurance to protect employees in the event of injuries and or death at their workplace. And whereas the current relevant laws prescribing liability insurance provisions for employees at their place of work or locations may not at all or insufficiently extend to such employees working from their homes or other such designated places to carry out their work functions. Be it resolved that this motion be referred to a special select committee of this House to examine the existing legislative provisions for liability insurance covering employees in both public and private employment, and submit a report to the House of Representatives, making recommendations where necessary and appropriate to ameliorate all identified deficiencies when carrying out their job duties from their homes or other such places as may be determined by their employers. And be it resolved that given the continuing urgency of this matter and vulnerabilities of all employees, that the Select Committee be required to submit a final report or an interim report on this motion within 90 days of the approval of this motion. And where an interim report is submitted, not more than 45 days to be granted for the submission of a final report.
Member Jackson, you also had...
Sorry. I ask that the motion be approved. Okay. What do you want me to do now?
Member Jackson, you
yes,
what
I
we're
wish to move that
discussing
at a
is
later stage today.
Okay, that's
yes.
Fine,
yes.
fine.
Madam Speaker, the member needs to formally do so that the Hansard can record it. In the language of the House, of course.
Madam Speaker, I beg to ask that the motion for which I gave notice of.
No.
Yes, I'm coming to that. The motion at a later stage that it be approved. Yes.
House Leader, a moment, please. Questions and answers to questions?
Yeah.
Member Jackson.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give, I ask that at the expiration of 21 days, the Honourable Minister of Finance...
Madam Speaker, this is a point of order. I think we have to get the language of the House.
Okay, let me get
in order.
it.
Right.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that.
Madam Speaker, at the expiration of 21 days, I will ask the Honourable Minister of Finance, Planning and the Public Service to answer the following questions.
Madam Speaker, so on a point of order, the time being after 4, after 3:15 in fact, Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the question and answer session be allowed to be extended beyond the date, beyond the time of 3:15 p.m. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
It now being past 3:15, the question to the House is that questions and answers to questions be taken at this time. Those in favour? Those in favour? Those opposed? The ayes have it. Member Jackson.
Madam Speaker, at the expiration of 21 days, I will ask the Honourable Minister of Finance and Planning and Public Service the following questions standing in my name.
Thanks, Member Jackson. Member Paulwell.
Madam Speaker, I rise to inquire of the House Leader in relation to the first question on the question page, questions that were to be answered by the Prime Minister from March 2021 in relation to the mining operations at Puerto Bueno, and to seek from him a definitive date when those questions will be answered, especially now that the matter is so relevant.
Madam Speaker, I do have those questions which I gather were sent in and are being processed and are actually being dealt with. It came to my attention only, in fact, yesterday, based on the system that we have to enable very expeditious answering of questions. So I assure the member that those questions will be answered before the 28th of the month, as per the requirement. So I can assure you, you have 3 questions, I think, in all?
No, I think the House Leader is misleading himself. The question is the first set of questions on the question and answer paper. These were due from March 2021.
Oh, last year. I'll have to take note of that, because that set of questions from March 2021, I'll definitely have to look at that. I certainly will look at that and get back to you as quickly as possible. But I'm aware of some more recent questions, exactly, which I know are being processed for answers now. Yes.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the House, motions for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained, public business.
Madam Speaker, on the matter of public business, I would ask that the supplementary estimates which are tabled, that indeed we begin, in fact, on public business in relation to that, and then we could go to the other matters such as, of course, the PAAC virtual meeting requirement, and also you'd rather to... Madam Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister has priority, I believe. So, may we take, in fact, the motion in his name at this time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So, Minister Chang, proceeds of crime.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I present for the constitution an order for the designation of trust and corporate services providers as designated non-financial institution. This is an exercise of the power conferred on the Minister pursuant to paragraph 1(2) of the 4th schedule to the Process of Crime Act. This designation reiterates Jamaica's stance in the fight against money laundering and bringing Jamaica into compliance with our international obligations and practices. The Process of Crime Act 2007 outlines and imposes obligation on business in regulated sector to take steps to prevent and detect money laundering and create offences for breaches under the
Minister Chan, one moment, please. Just procedurally, would you be so kind as to move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable you to take this motion before commencing the debate?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders, enable me to take the motion, notes which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the Minister to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier. Those in favour? Those opposed? The ayes have it. Minister, you may start the debate on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I present for consideration an order for the designation of trust and corporate services providers as designated non-financial institution. This is an exercise of the power conferred on the Minister pursuant to paragraph 1(2) of the 4th schedule to the Process of Crime Act. This designation reiterates Jamaica's stance in the fight against money laundering and brings Jamaica in compliance with our international obligations and practices. The Process of Crime Act 2007 outlines and imposes obligations on business in regulated sectors to take steps to prevent and detect money laundering and creates offences for breaches under the Act. Essentially, the designation of trust and corporate service providers will apply to any person or entity providing 1, a trust service, or 2, a corporate service. It will allow these entities to fall within the regulated sector as provided by the Act. This designation is subject to the definition for trust services and corporate service as provided for in the Trust and Corporate Services Provisions Act. Madam Speaker, the designation of trust and corporate services providers as designated non-financial institution will strengthen Jamaica's anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism, that is the AML CFT regime. Trust and corporate service providers are categorized under Recommendation 24 of the FATF as designated non-financial business and professional professions. Recommendation 24 makes it a requirement to countries to ensure that this class of business is subject to effective systems of monitoring and compliance with anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism measures. It was highlighted within the Jamaica's 3rd follow-up report and technical compliance re-rating that Jamaica is only partially compliant with Recommendation 24 due to deficiencies in the monitoring of trust and corporate services providers. It is believed, Madam Speaker, that the designation of trust and corporate service providers will ensure Jamaica's compliance with Recommendation 24 of the FATF, which will bring Jamaica into greater compliance with all of the FATF recommendations. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, this designation will enable the Financial Services Commission to be given the requisite authority to enable trust and corporate services providers to operate in compliance with the process of crime and its regulation. This order is a significant step in Jamaica's anti-money laundering efforts and requires and would suggest that every member of the House support what is a very important order in our combating of financial crimes. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
You may go ahead, Opposition Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the opposition supports the motion to approve the order. It follows from the nature of the activities that the corporate service providers and trustees will be involved in, assuming we ever get to the point where we have an international financial services industry that's actually happening. This is a situation where we're essentially checking a box because the international community that we have to respond to, who are very concerned about our anti-money laundering architecture, have a close eye on us. We're on a grey list with some of them, and they're aware of the legislation that was passed some time ago as part of the collection of acts of Parliament to support Jamaica establishing an international financial services industry. And some amendments were brought in 2021, late 2021, to the legislation in order to beef up the aspects of it that were considered to be non-compliant with the strictures to do with the financing of terrorism and the fight against money laundering and weapons of mass destruction proliferation. And this now is another step in the process so as to designate these entities, if we ever have any that are actually licensed and functioning, as non-financial entities that have to comply with Jamaica's regime for reporting on transactions, suspicious transactions, etc., etc. So it's just another step in the long list or journey of things that we have to do to keep abreast of and try to become compliant with the international framework for the fighting against money laundering, against terrorism financing, and against the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. We have no objection and we support it accordingly. I appreciate at some point, I don't think the Minister of National Security can do this, but at some point having an update as to how we are doing with the other aspects of this exercise, especially as it relates to the legal profession, who, as you may know, had litigated the whole issue of being designated in this way. And that matter has gone through the courts and then to the courts of first instance and the Court of Appeal. And I know that the Minister of Finance is anxious to see a resolution of it, but I'm not sure what progress has been made, whether we can find achieve a negotiated, I think, which would be ideal really, and some kind of negotiated position with them that would enable Jamaica to be compliant. At the same time, hopefully addressing as many of their concerns as possible. So thank you, Madam.
Thank the member from President for his support on an issue. As indicated, this is just one of many one of the many orders required to ensure that Jamaica's financial legislation that meets international standards, and certainly bringing a number of the services under designated non-financial institutions. While I seek the members of this House support, just indicate that the issue raised by the member to designated the legal profession is still before the courts. We had the local application which went to the Court of Appeal, and as a result of that, we are not in a position to do much negotiation until it matters, which is being taken to the Privy Council. And I understand there will be a date in the first half of this year for the matters to be resolved. But it's an important part of what we're doing in Jamaica. I said we are part of the international financial community, and we have to have all our orders and regulations in place to remain not only compliant, but to participate fully in the international operation and critical to the country's economic development. I now move, Madam Speaker, and seek the affirmation by the members of the House of the order, the proceeds of crime designated non-financial institution, trust and corporate service providers, order 2022.
Minister Chang, I am of the presumption that the debate on the motion has been concluded. Would you be so kind as to ask that the House approve?
Madam Speaker, I now seek the House approval for the motion moved earlier. The proceeds of crime designated non-financial institution, trust and corporate service providers, order 2020.
Thanks, Minister Chang. The question is that the motion notice of which Minister Chang gave earlier be approved. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will take next in public business. If you're ready, Minister Clark.
Supplementary. Madam Speaker, we're at public business, and I now move, Madam Speaker, for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion of which I gave notice earlier.
Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now move, be it resolved, that the second supplementary estimate of expenditure of the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, which were laid on the table of the House on 11th day of January 2022, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report.
The question is that the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, which were laid on the table of the House on the 11th day of January 2022, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, just a very quick remarks on the supplementary before I mention the date at which the PAC will consider it. And we table the second supplementary estimates today, Madam Speaker, subsequent to the passing of the first supplementary estimates in October. Much has transpired within the realm of government in Jamaica. At the point of the first supplementary estimates, for example, there were no final settlements with any of the public sector bargaining groups. And as such, the government's offer for increases in wages and salaries that was captured under the contingencies activities of the Ministry of Finance and Public Service. Since then, 31 bargaining groups have settled. And this is the primary reason for the second supplementary estimates during this fiscal year. The appropriation authorization for these payments, the payments of these increases by ministries, departments, and agencies, requires that the relevant allocations be made to the MDA heads, and thus the need for the second supplementary estimates, i.e., in the budget approved by the Parliament, there's an amount under the Ministry of Finance for the increases, but for the ministers to pay the increases, these amounts have to be allocated to every single department, ministry, and agencies, and that allocation has to come through Parliament, through the budgetary procedures. Parliament will also recall that in the first supplementary estimates, an amount of $5 billion was allocated under the care component of the Serve Jamaica program, given the continuing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was also captured under the contingencies activities. This amount also needs to be appropriately allocated to the implementing ministries, departments and agencies, and this is being done through the second supplementary estimates. Madam Speaker, there's also the premium for the catastrophe bond issued earlier this year, which was not fully captured in the budget, and this is being addressed under the second supplementary estimates. It should be recalled that the premium for this bond is covered by grants from the governments of the United Kingdom, Germany, and the United States. Also, Madam Speaker, within the context of the continuing impact of COVID-19, the Government of Jamaica facilitated a special employment program in December 2019 through members of this House, or through the Constituency Development Fund, rather, to assist some of the most vulnerable through economic activities. This required additional funding and the regularization through the second supplementary estimates. Madam Speaker, the health sector continues to incur significant levels of expenditure for compensation, given the extended hours being worked, and have again indicated a shortfall in this year's allocation, and this is being addressed in the second supplementary estimates. Since the first supplementary estimates, Madam Speaker, domestic interest rates have increased, and there's been a slight depreciation in the currency, and this has resulted in an increase in debt service requirements. But in addition, assistance has also been extended to the National Water Commission and the Central Wastewater Treatment Company to facilitate the repayment of maturing guaranteed debt, which is captured in the second supplementary estimates. It should be noted that this support has contributed to a reduction in the public debt stock. These represent the major adjustments that have necessitated the second supplementary estimates. However, there are a number of other expenses that we're seeking to address through the supplementary, such as additional requirements for the Ministry of National Security and the police, support to the National Solid Waste Management Authority, and bank charges related to the operations of the PATH program. The second supplementary estimates at $893 billion represents an overall increase in expenditure of $25.8 billion. The increased allocation is only on the recurrent expenditures. Capital remains at the level of the first supplementary, with some reallocation between projects or among projects. The $25.8 billion in additional expenditure is comprised of $8.2 billion for non-debt recurring expenditure and $17.6 billion for debt service, of which $12.6 billion represents principal repayment, i.e. the amortization of debt, and a large chunk of that has to do with debt owing by the National Water Commission, which is guaranteed by the Government of Jamaica, which came due in December, and the government has paid off that liability, and by doing so has reduced the debt stock to that amount, in that amount. The revised budget is therefore comprised of compensation of employees, $245 billion, and this represents a slight reduction from the previous first supplementary estimates, because the one-off payments that are being made to public sector employees do not fall under compensation in the strict definition. They fall under program. So it's not that compensation is being reduced, it's just that it's been reallocated to the area under which it falls. Recurrent programs at $296 billion, above the line $276 billion, and below the line $19.99 billion. Capital at $54.2 billion, and public debt service at $297.7 billion. The additional expenditure will be financed through $11.2 billion in additional revenue flows, $5.3 billion in additional loan receipts, and utilization of an additional $9.2 billion from prior year cash resources, and that primarily went to the repayment of the NWC obligation that became due. Madam Speaker, the estimates being referred to the Public Administration and Appropriation Committee. I've been advised by the chair of that committee that the meeting will be held tomorrow, Wednesday, January 12, 2022, and I believe a resolution will be dealt with in public business, which will call for that meeting to be held virtually. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, even though I know this is not the time for debate, I would like to ask the Minister, how many bargaining groups are yet to accept the wage offer? And for those who haven't accepted, whether provision has been made in this supplementary budget for that provision, for those amounts of monies, and what would that, if you want to call it that, liability be for those who are yet to accept?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't have the precise number of bargain units that have not accepted. I do know that we have two major groups that we're still having discussions with. The second supplementary estimates, however, makes provision for wage increases for all members of the public sector. And so we hope that we'll arrive at some settlement with the groups that are outstanding before the end of the fiscal year, because there's always a problem in carrying over these provisions into another fiscal year. You know, it doesn't work like that. And so it's actually in the best interest of all concerned, including Jamaica, people, citizens of Jamaica, that the amounts that have been provided for are actually spent in this fiscal year. But to answer your question, yes, provisions have been made for groups that have not yet settled.
I know two other groups are the police and the teachers. Is there any provision made for the overtime monies that are owed to the police, for which there is an ongoing court case? Is the government minded or intends to find a way to settle those outstanding amounts, given the nature of crime and the need to ensure that our police personnel don't feel a sense of demotivation and demoralization?
So the second supplementary estimates, Madam Speaker, which we will get into over the course of the next few days, has a significant allocation to the Ministry of National Security and to the Police Department for additional expenditure that they will need for the remainder of this fiscal year. And I'll remind you that for practical purposes, 6 weeks are left in the fiscal year, just for practical purposes as to when the Accountant General begins to close things down. And so the expenditure represents what can be reasonably spent in that period of time. With respect to a matter that's before the court, I don't think that is a matter that, with respect, I want to address at this time. I mean, even the way you phrase the question is pejorative because it makes a presumption of something that is owing, which may or may not be the case. So it would not be, I don't think it's in the best interest for me to comment on that publicly at this point in time.
House Leader,
Madam Speaker, I ask that the motion be amended to read as follows. Be it resolved that the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates and the second supplementary estimates. There's something missing here. And the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022. Oh, and the second supplementary estimates for public bodies and public bodies revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022 be referred to the PAC for consideration and report.
Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. House Leader will complete on the virtual meetings for PAAC.
Madam Speaker, I think there's another matter in the name of the Minister of Finance. Yes. That I would ask that he takes at this time, and thereafter we will conclude the matter with regards to the PAC. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Pensions, Jamaica Constabulary Force, Validation and Indemnity Act.
Clark.
A bill shortly entitled the Pensions Jamaica Constabulary Force Validation and Indemnity Act 2021 read the first time.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of a second reading of the bill. And Madam Speaker, I further move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take second reading of the bill and to take it through all its concluding stages.
Those in favour? Those opposed? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I rise to introduce the Pensions Jamaica Constabulary Force Validation and Indemnity Act 2021. Madam Speaker, this bill seeks to validate the approval granted by the Governor-General for early retirement for officers of the Jamaica Constabulary Force during the period February 13, 2019 to August 13, 2019, and actions taken by all persons who facilitated the approval process consequent on the repeal of Section 56, subsection 1, subsection A, subsection 1, and subsection Roman numeral 3 of the Jamaica Constabulary Force Act relating to retirement and pension. Madam Speaker, prior to April 1, 2018, a number of officers from the JCF applied for early retirement, having met the eligibility criteria of either attaining the age of 50 years or having completed 30 years in the Jamaica Constabulary Force, in keeping with Section 56 of the Jamaica Constabulary Force Act, which is now repealed and which was in effect at the time of their application. On April 1, 2018, Madam Speaker, the Pensions Public Service Act 2017, which governs the grant and award of retirement benefits to members of the Government of Jamaica pension arrangement, including members of the JCF, came into effect. The new legislation introduced several changes to the eligibility requirements for retirement, and those changes had adverse implications for the members of the JCF who had previously applied for early retirement and were granted approval. Madam Speaker, in that Section 23, subsection 1, Section C of the new legislation of the Pensions Public Service Act 2017 now require that officers may be granted early retirement subject to approval of the Governor-General on or after attaining the age of 50 years after completing no less than 30 years of service. These amended provisions, Madam Speaker, now made some of the previous eligible applicants at the time of the application now ineligible for early retirement. Madam Speaker, in order to give effect to the approvals granted by the Governor-General, the matter was referred to the Legislation Committee for the drafting of legislation to be considered, which would in effect validate that approval and give lawful effect to the approval for the officers to retire during the period February 13, 2019 to August 13, 2019, and to indemnify all persons acting on behalf of the government from liability in relation thereto. This legislation is what is being considered by this House today. Madam Speaker, I now invite members of this Honourable House to support the passage of this validation and indemnity bill.
Madam Speaker, I've looked at what the bill is attempting to do, and there is no objection from our side in relation to this validation bill.
Minister Clark, you will conclude and ask.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I ask that the bill be read a second time.
The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Validate and Confirm as Lawful all acts and omissions relating to the approval granted by the Governor-General for the early retirement of officers from the Jamaica Constabulary Force during the period commencing on the 13th day of February 2019 and ending on the 13th day of August 2019 to indemnify the government and all persons acting on behalf of the government from liability in relation thereto and for connected matters, read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. Minister, since you have identified no issues, I put clauses 1 and clause 2. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the preamble. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Mayors is back. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendments to the House. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now, Madam Speaker, I just rise to address the motion relating to the...
No, third reading first, Minister.
I ask for the third reading of the bill, please.
Yes. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Validate and Confirm as Lawful all acts and omissions relating to the approval granted by the Governor-General for the early retirement of officers from the Jamaica Constabulary Force during the period commencing on the 13th day of February 2019 and ending on the 30th day of August 2019, to indemnify the government and all persons acting on behalf of the government from liability in relation thereto, and for connected matters, read a third time and passed.
Bill for signing.
So, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance will also deal with the matter of the custom tariffs, Trade and Economic Cooperation Agreement between CARICOM and Cuba, Resolution 2021.
Minister of Finance, Minister Clark.
Madam Speaker, the matter for consideration by this Honourable House is the confirmation of the customs tariff, Trade and Economic Cooperation between CARICOM and Cuba, Resolution 2021. Madam Speaker, Section 5 of the Customs Act provides for the House of Representatives by resolution to impose import duties, revoke, reduce, increase, or alter any duties so imposed, and may provide for the importation of any good without the payment of customs duties. Madam Speaker, the agreement establishing trade and economic cooperation between CARICOM and the Republic of Cuba was signed on July the 5th, 2000. The first protocol to implement that agreement, including agreements on reciprocal promotion and protection of investment and protection of intellectual property rights, were signed on the 15th of June 2001. Subsequently, the first protocol to enact the Trade and Economic Cooperation was published in the Jamaica Gazette dated July 29, 2014. Madam Speaker, the resolutions that have been brought before this House provides for the implementation of the second protocol to the TECA, which is the Trade and Economic Cooperation Agreement. The second protocol was signed in Georgetown, Guyana on 9th of November 2017 and will give effect to amendments to the Trade and Economic Cooperation Agreement. The second protocol will facilitate an expansion of the agreement to allow for preferential market access to Cuba, as well as preferential access to markets of CARICOM's more developed countries. Madam Speaker, Cuba has granted duty-free access on 344 tariff lines to CARICOM. Conversely, CARICOM has granted preferential treatment on 74 lines, of which 63 will be given duty-free access and the remaining lines will be phased. Madam Speaker, it is important to note Jamaica has been applying the second protocol administratively since 2018, as the legal requirements were not fully completed to honour the timelines established by CARICOM. Based on the fact that the second protocol to the TECA is currently being implemented by Jamaica administratively, completing the legal requirements to enact the protocol in law will not incur any revenue or loss. Madam Speaker, Jamaica remains committed to honouring our obligations under the various international free trade agreements to which we are signatories. Accordingly, Madam Speaker, the Customs Tariff, Trade and Economic Cooperation Agreement between CARICOM and Cuba, Resolution 2021, is hereby submitted to this Honourable House for confirmation.
Madam Speaker, in responding to the resolution brought by the Minister, which further implements the agreement that I know I have more than passing association with. I must say it's been a while in coming. Signed in 2001, and I think the first protocol was sometime after. Even this protocol was in 2017. The agreement is a non-reciprocal agreement and benefits the CARICOM member states significantly, and the more developed member states benefits among which Jamaica is included, benefits significantly as well as part of that agreement. In accordance with the terms of the agreement, Madam Speaker, I am anticipating that the negotiation, that the protocols themselves and the resolution brought before this House would have had the benefit of our private sector looking at them. It is true that it is being applied administratively, but what is being asked for in this provided for in this resolution, is the duty-free access to Cuba as part of that non-reciprocal arrangement. And with that understanding, Madam Speaker, that the private sector was consulted on it and had an opportunity to give its views on it, the opposition has no difficulty in supporting the resolution.
Yes, Madam Speaker, what we're doing here today is a fulfillment of a process, certainly with respect to the second protocol that started in 2017, where the second protocol between CARICOM and Cuba was signed, and it was implemented administratively. You dealt with the first protocol, right? The second protocol was signed in 2017, right? And it was administratively implemented in 2018, and this is just giving it legal force. So before signing in 2017, I would be absolutely certain that the relevant consultations would have happened then. This is just a legal tidying up to give it the force of law. And I know that the member behind you is quite pleased that we are at this point of implementing the second protocol, having spent many of our formative years north of Jamaica but south of Miami. Madam Speaker, I ask that the motion be approved.
Minister has concluded the debate on the motion. The question is that the motion, notice of which the Minister gave earlier, be approved. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Last but not least, House Leader.
Well, Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, in relation to the PAAC being allowed to convene virtually.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the Minister, House Leader, to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now beg to move that the motion be approved.
Those in favour? Those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, the business of the House has come to an end for today, and I'd just like to indicate, prior to this motion of adjournment, that the House considers that the virtual meeting of the PAAC, having been approved, would in fact take place tomorrow to enable the consideration of the second supplementary estimate. Yes, and the chairman is suggesting a hybrid meeting, which is quite in order. The motion I just had approved is to enable members to, in fact, participate virtually if needs be. That leads, Madam Speaker, to the next meeting of the House, and that meeting will be on Thursday, the 13th. Very important that all members make an effort to attend, as this is a critical financial bill that has to get the attention of members of the House. Once we are dealing with appropriation matters, the House needs to give its full attention, of course. So, Madam Speaker, as it is not intended to do any further business, I now move that the House be adjourned until the 13th of January at 2 p.m. at the George William Gordon House. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. This Honourable House now stands adjourned.
I think you don't think you should give me more than 3 million. I might need more. I might need some. It don't come yet. I just.